Trouble at the Attucks cottage. 3 years had passed since Crispus was baptized, and now the Attucks household had 3 children. Little brother, as the family called him, was a year old. Both Phoebe and Chris were very happy about him. For several days now, little brother had been crying and whining. This evening he seemed to have taken a change for the worse. His face was flushed, and he was much more restless than he had been before. Phoebe sat on the bed beside him, bathing his face in cool water. Mrs. Attucks stopped to look at him, great alarm showing on her face. She felt afraid. "Watch him closely, Phoebe, while I try to get help," she said, throwing a heavy shawl over her shoulders. "I'll go to see whether I can get Aunt Maria to come. She will have medicine and will know what to do. Your father and Chris are still at the big house doing their chores. They may be back before I return." "Yes, Mamma," Phoebe said. She knew that her mother was frightened, and she was frightened too. She watched little brother carefully. Every breath that he took seemed to hurt him. Mrs. Attucks hurried along the path around the colonel's house to the back where the slaves' cabins were located. Soon she came to Aunt Maria's cottage, which was near the big house. She noticed that the door was ajar, and she heard a voice inside. But she hesitated when she heard one of the slaves talking to Aunt Maria. "If you had not heard from Cato," he was saying, "why would you try to join him? Canada is a wild country, and it's a long way off. What do we know about it? And besides, Cato might be dead when you get there." "That's what I say too, Maria," said the slave's wife, who had come to the cabin with her husband. "Colonel Buckminster is very good to us here. Cato should not have left. I certainly would not go to Canada looking for him." Aunt Maria started to talk, and Mrs. Attucks overheard her mention Chris. "Yesterday Chris was here," she said. "He told me about talking with a sailor who had come out from Boston. His ship had just come from Canada, and he said that he had seen Cato up there." Mrs. Attucks stepped inside, but in the shadow of the door no one noticed her. Several slaves, both men and women, sat facing the fire, which provided the only light. Aunt Maria stood at one side of the fireplace facing them. An old man, leaning on a homemade cane, spoke up. "Chris is only a boy and may have been mistaken. Also, there are many Negroes named Cato, and the man the sailor mentioned may not have been your husband." "How can you reach Canada?" said another slave. "You'll have to go to Canada by ship, and you can't get on a ship without a permit. If I were you, Maria, I would forget about following Cato and try to be content." Maria dropped her head in thought. The group began to sing softly. In the middle of their song, Aunt Maria looked up and saw Mrs. Attucks standing in the doorway. "Come, join us, Nancy," she called. Then, seeing the expression on Mrs. Attucks' face, she rushed to her side and cried, "What is the trouble? Why do you look so worried?" The singing stopped and everyone turned to look at Mrs. Attucks. "My baby's sick," she explained. "Little brother is very sick. He's red hot and in great pain. Help us, Aunt Maria. Please come to our cottage to help us." "The fever!" the group cried in unison. "Yes, perhaps he has the fever," Aunt Maria said. "I'll come with you. First let me get me some roots and herbs to take along." Aunt Maria went to the fireplace, gathered up several small bags and put them in the pockets of her dress. Then, taking Mrs. Attucks by the arm, she led her gently but firmly toward the door and out of the cabin. When they reached the Attucks cottage, Prince and Chris were already home. Prince was leaning over the baby's bed, helping Phoebe to take care of the baby. He looked worried. "Help us, Aunt Maria, please," he begged. Aunt Maria went to work at once. She told Phoebe to continue bathing the baby's face and asked Chris to bring a mug of hot water. Then she took some green leaves from one of the bags in her pockets and dropped them into the water. She stirred the mixture briskly for a moment with her fingers. Finally, she put a few drops on the baby's lips and watched him, but she didn't look pleased. She took a dark pill from another bag and softened it with water. Then she squeezed liquid from the soft pill in the baby's chest and watched him again. Chris and Phoebe sat side by side near the fireplace and watched Aunt Maria in silence. They could see that their father and mother were frightened, and for this reason they were frightened themselves. They didn't really understand what was happening. For a while the cottage was silent except for the crackling of the fire and the baby's restless, labored breathing. After a time Aunt Maria rose and went to the bed again. She repeated the treatment, bending over the baby and gently rubbing its chest. As she worked, she looked more and more worried. At last she looked up and shook her head. "I'm sorry," she said. "He's gone. It was too late. Lord have mercy." She bowed her head. For the first time Chris and Phoebe saw their mother cry. She cried furiously. "There, dear," said Prince. He patted her shoulder in an effort to console her. Suddenly Aunt Maria began to sing and Chris joined her. "Steal away, steal away, steal away to Jesus. Steal away home. I ain't got long to stay here. My Lord, He calls me way up yonder. The trumpet sounds within my soul. I ain't got long to stay here." Aunt Maria left after the song ended. "Where did you learn that song, Chris?" Phoebe asked. "From Aunt Maria," Chris said. "You know her?" Phoebe was surprised. Yes, I like to go behind the big house, he said. We have fun there. Will you take me sometime? Before Chris could answer, his mother said sternly, I don't want either of you to go behind the big house. Your father has told you many times, Chris, not to go there. Don't make me promise, mother, Chris said, but I'll try. Chris and Phoebe take the fever. Late that night, the Attucks family needed to call Aunt Maria again. Phoebe and Chris became feverish and had severe pains in their chests. As Chris drew each breath, he felt as if a sword were running through his chest. Phoebe felt almost as bad, but didn't have such high fever. When Aunt Maria arrived, she started to work promptly. Once more, she dug into the pockets of her dress and pulled out some green leaves and dark-colored pills. We must work fast, she said. She put the green leaves in hot water and told the children to drink some of the mixture. She asked them to put the pills into their mouths to soften them. Then she took the moistened pills in her brown hands and squeezed the liquid onto the children's chests. Afterwards, she rubbed their chests to work the liquid in. I'm going to leave you some pills, Aunt Maria said to Mrs. Attucks. Keep putting the liquid on the children's chests until the pain goes away. Mrs. Attucks took the pills. Thank you, she said gratefully. Keep the children warm and don't fall asleep, cautioned Aunt Maria. Come for me again if they aren't better by dawn. Now I must rush back home, for many people have the fever. Do you think the children will be all right? Mrs. Attucks asked with terror in her eyes. Aunt Maria patted her shoulder. Pray and take care of them. We slaves are strong. But my baby went so fast. He was young, Aunt Maria said. These children are big and strong. Look at Chris. He's not quite 7, but he's as big as a boy of 11. He's a fine boy. Prince came forward. You know Chris well, don't you? He said. Yes, he visits us often. When he comes, do you teach him to rebel against his master? Aunt Maria turned in the doorway and looked Prince squarely in the eyes. I don't teach him to rebel against anybody or anything, she said. But he has strong feelings. He has a mind of his own, and I can't teach him anything he doesn't want to learn. Don't encourage him, Aunt Maria. He's just a boy. Let him be content. Aunt Maria turned to go, but said, Don't try to be different from us. Don't keep Chris from his people. It's not right. Good night. Prince and his wife continued watching all night, and by morning the children could breathe without pain. Both parents fell asleep, fully clothed on the foot of the bed. They were relieved. Phoebe and Chris were cured.